Hello! Today we will be covering the FIFO, or first in first out method of calculating cost of goods sold and ending inventory. On the right, I have a list of transactions that the company was involved in, including purchases and sales. On the left, I have a chart where I will show my work as we complete this problem. There are three columns I will be filling out. First, we have purchases, which we will use only when the company purchases new inventory. I have a plus sign here because new purchases add to our inventory. The next column is COGS, or cost of goods sold, and we will use this column anytime the company sells some of its inventory. I have a minus sign here because sales subtract from our inventory. The third column is inventory, which is where we will keep track of how much inventory the company has as of the given date. We need to add to the inventory column anytime there is a purchase, and subtract from the inventory column anytime there is a sale. Our first piece of information is from January 1st. The company had 500 units of inventory, which they had previously purchased at $10 each. Since these units are part of beginning inventory, we can place them in the inventory column. Now, some instructors will have you calculate the inventory balance at this stage, taking 500 units times $10. But in this video, I'm going to wait until the end to do any calculations. Next, on January 2nd, the company purchased 300 units at $11 per unit. Since this is a purchase, we can put it in the purchase column. Since there were no sales on this date, we can skip the cost of goods sold column. Now, we always need to fill out the inventory column. On January 1st, we had 500 units at $10 each, and since there were no sales, those units are still in inventory, so we can copy them down for January 2nd. Additionally, 300 units were purchased at $11 per unit, and since purchases are plus, we add them to our inventory column. In order to make the rest of the problem easier, I'm going to highlight our chart based on inventory cost. Let's make the $10 units yellow and the $11 units green. Next, on January 7th, we have our first sale of 640 units. That means we get to use our cost of goods sold column. Now, before we record this transaction, I want to make something clear, and that's the difference between cost and selling price. As we can see in the units sold at retail column, this company sells its inventory for $35 per unit, so the selling price is $35. Looking at the units purchased at cost column, we can see that the company pays anywhere from $10 to $15 per unit for their inventory, at least for the month of January. Now, the cost of goods sold, or COGS column, needs a cost, not a selling price. So don't make the mistake of putting 640 units at $35 per unit here. But if the cost ranges from $10 to $15, which cost should we put in the cost of goods sold column? That's where the different inventory costing methods come in, and this video is about the method called FIFO, or first in, first out. So what we do is we look at our inventory layers, in this case yellow at $10 per unit and green at $11 per unit, and grab the units that were there first. In this case, the yellow units from beginning inventory. Since the yellows were the first ones in, now they will be the first ones out, or sold. But that doesn't quite cover the 640 units sold, so we need to go to the next layer, the green units, and grab the remaining required units. The question is, how many units do we need? Well, 640 units total sold, minus the 500 yellow units we already recorded equals 140 green units sold. So that's what we can record in this box. Remember, the total of all units in the cost of goods sold column for one particular date must add up to the total number of units sold on that date. So in this case, 500 plus 140 equals 640, so we are good to go. Now we need to calculate the January 7th inventory. Since cost of goods sold is a minus, we take our previous inventory and subtract anything we sold, one layer at a time. So that's 500 yellow units at $10 each minus 500 yellow units sold equals 0 yellow units. So there's no need to record the yellow units in ending inventory since we have none left. As for the green units, we can take the 300 in our previous inventory and subtract the 140 sold to get 160 units remaining. On January 11th, we sold 120 more units. Since we made a sale, we will be using the cost of goods sold column. Now this one is a bit easier than the last one, since there is only one layer of inventory to choose from, the green units. So we grab the 120 units and put them in the cost of goods sold column. Now for our inventory column, remember cost of goods sold is a minus. So we take the 160 units that we already had in inventory minus the 120 units that we sold to get 40 green units remaining in our inventory. Next, on January 19th, we have a purchase of 400 units at $13 per unit. Since we have a purchase, we can record these units in the purchase column. Now we need a new color for the $13 per unit inventory. Let's use orange. Moving on to the inventory column, on January 11th we had 40 units at $11 each, the green units. And since there were no sales, those units are still in inventory, so we copy them down for January 19th. Additionally, 400 units were purchased at $13 per unit, and since purchases are plus, we add them to our inventory column. Next, on January 21st, we have a purchase of 110 units at $15 per unit. Since we have a purchase, we can record these units in the purchase column. Now we need a new color for the $15 per unit inventory. So let's use blue. Moving on to the inventory column, on January 19th, there are two layers of inventory, green and orange. And since there were no sales, those units are still in inventory, so we can copy both of them down for January 21st. Additionally, 110 units were purchased at $15 per unit, and since purchases are plus, we add them to our inventory column. Finally, on January 23rd, we have a sale of 510 units, which means we get to use the cost of goods sold column again. Remember, since we are using the first in first out method, we need to start with the inventory that was there first. In this case, the green units. Next, we can move on to the next oldest units, which would be the orange units. Notice we are up to 440 units, 400 plus 40, but we need a total of 510 units, which was how many we sold. If we take 510 and subtract the 440 that we already have, we get 70 units, which we'll need to take from the remaining layer of inventory, which is the blue units at $15 each. Now we need to calculate the January 23rd inventory. Since cost of goods sold is minus, we take our previous inventory and subtract anything we sold, one layer at a time. So that's 40 green units at $11 each, minus the 40 green units we sold, 0 green units remaining, so we don't need to record that one. The same is true for the orange units, 400 minus 400 is 0. As for the blue units, we can take the 110 in our previous inventory and subtract the 70 we sold to get 40 units remaining in ending inventory. Alright, we have done the hard part. All that's left to do is to calculate the cost of goods sold in the ending inventory. To calculate the cost of goods sold, we simply multiply the units and their cost for each row of the cost of goods sold column and add them together. So that's 500 times 10 plus 140 times 11 plus 120 times 11 plus 40 times 11 plus 400 times 13 plus 70 times 15 equals $14,550 for our cost of goods sold. Thankfully for the inventory, all we need to do is to calculate the balance as of the final date, which is January 23rd. So that's 40 times 15 is $600 of ending inventory. So technically we are done. The cost of goods sold is $14,550 and the ending inventory is $600. But there's one more step we can take to check our work. We can calculate something that's called the cost of goods available for sale, which is simply the beginning inventory plus all purchases. So that's 500 times 10 plus 300 times 11 plus 400 times 13 plus 110 times 15 equals $15,150. Now, if we take the ending inventory of $600 and add that to the cost of goods sold of $14,550, we get, well, $15,150, which is the same as the cost of goods available for sale. So that's a good way for you to check your work, and it works regardless of which inventory costing method you are using.